2 days after Americans cast their ballots to pick the next US president, remaining mail-in votes are still being counted in some states, making it too early to call a winner. Having won key swing states like Wisconsin and Michigan on Wednesday, Democratic candidate Joe Biden looks set to win, with him being just 17 electoral votes shy of the 270 that he needs. Now, President Donald Trump isn't prepared to leave the White House. He sued 3 states over vote counting and appears likely to continue contesting election results. The battle over the Senate seats are also in limbo as the results of 4 Senate races were unclear. Today, we discuss these uncertainties surrounding an election day that is turning into an election week. I'm joined by Tony Kravaric, chairman of the Republican Party of San Diego County. Thank you for joining us today.
Thanks for having me.
We're also joined by John Nielsen Wright, Career Foundation Career Fellow at the Chatham House and Senior Lecturer of Modern Japanese Studies at the University of Cambridge. It's always lovely to have you on the show.
Great to be here.
Now, let's start with you, Mr. Kravaric. Now, the vote counting is still going on, but, well, it looks like Joe Biden is set to be the winner. But did you expect the race to be so close between the president and Biden? I mean, your party is holding on to the Senate seats quite tightly as well, but it looks very uncertain there. I mean, what's your outlook on the 2 races that we're seeing?
Well, if you would have, the media would have had it. What we were looking at is some landslide repudiation of President Trump, and as one example, they had Wisconsin. The latest poll was that Vice President Biden would win Wisconsin by 17 points, and of course, Wisconsin is razor thin to the point where there's an automatic recount granted if the president requests it, which of course he has. So what was to be a major drubbing or repudiation, at least if you listen to the media, turned out not to be so. And not only did in the House, the Democrats did not gain seats, they actually lost seats, about a half a dozen or so far, and the Senate seems comfortably staying in Republican hands.
So before November 3rd, it seemed that the Democrats, they were somewhat confident about gaining control of the White House and the Senate. But, well, Dr. Nielsen Wright, were you surprised by how close this race was compared to what we saw in the opinion polls?
Yes, it's undoubtedly very surprising. We heard, of course, a lot of commentary before the election about the possibility of a so-called blue wave. There's no doubt that Donald Trump and the Republicans have done much better, I think, than many people expected. If you look, for example, at that early success in Florida, 3% margin of victory, much larger, of course. Before the election, there was talk of a Democratic margin of victory of about the same level. So there's no doubt this is a much closer race than people had anticipated, with some notable exceptions. It was Bernie Sanders, Joe Biden's rival to secure the nomination for the Democratic Party, who said just a few weeks ago that this sort of outcome was what he expected, that it would be much closer. There will be important questions, I think, that have to be asked about the whole validity of polling and the ability to make these sorts of predictions. It's important also, I think, to emphasize that even if the momentum at the moment is very much with the Democratic campaign, and I think all the predictions suggest that Joe Biden will ultimately, once all the votes are counted, be victorious, it's still not over, and we need to see what happens in some of those key states. It's also perhaps worth emphasizing that there hasn't been any great surprises in terms of which states have fallen for either party. If the Democrats are able, as they seem tantalizingly close to being able to do, to flip states like Georgia and Arizona, then that will be a significant breakthrough for the Democrats and will have implications. Georgia in particular, where at the moment there is a likelihood that the 2 Senate candidates, the 2 Senate seats, will go to a runoff that will take place in January of next year, of 2021. That could have a major implication in terms of affecting the balance of power in the Senate, because at the moment, Republicans look to maintain their majority there, but that critical contest in Georgia may have an impact on their ability to hang on to that majority.
Well, Mr. Kravaric, President Trump made it clear that he's not going to leave the White House without a fight. And if that is the case, if he refuses to accept the outcome or refutes it, then does he have any legal basis to do so? And do you think the whole of the Republican Party would actually back him up in doing this?
Well, there's no doubt that the entire establishment. This is what we're looking at. Are against President Trump, and he's really turned the Republican Party more into a populist party, like a worker party, and politicians and the institutions and the establishment. He's making them uncomfortable. So he's in the fight for his life. You have functionaries all up and down the food chain, whether it's electoral or just in the systems, and attorney generals and so forth in various states that are fighting him on it. And they have openly said they do not want him to win. So this is what he's up against, the fight of his life. This is the Alamo, if you will, for to make sure that we have a government that's for the people and not by the establishment, which is represented by Joe Biden, 47 years in politics. And so he's going to exhaust every legal maneuver if need be. But at some point, that will resolve itself and resolve itself peacefully. We'll have either a new president or as I believe it'll be President Trump. But in the meantime, we are rallying behind our president. We're standing behind our president. And when you live here, like I do, and you see this mess that is the way we do elections here, you would think that we were in a third world country with mail ballots popping up all over the place. And I've seen once things get into being counted, the ballots get in there, they do a great job of counting them. The problem is, what are the ballots that are showing up? And how hard do people scrutinize the signatures on these things? Because everybody's bias is towards counting the votes. And so it's very, very difficult, once you have a ballot, an envelope in your hand, to have it disqualified. I mean, once it shows up, it gets counted. And there they do the counting correctly. They're not reading the bubbles anywhere wrong. But we have a very weird, dysfunctional system within this cycle. Tens of millions of ballots mailed out in California. They just en masse decided to mail the entire voter file, and a lot of ballots floating around out there. And if you can get your hands on those ballots, you can vote, and you will probably not have that vote disqualified, even if you had nefarious purposes.
Well, unfortunately, Mr. Cravaro, many have seen this election as a referendum on President Trump. And, well, really, it was a race of personalities between what many are calling a chaotic president and a rather unremarkable alternative that was Joe Biden. When did the election stop being about party ideologies or agendas and rather become all about the persona? I mean, do you think there should be a better vetting process by the middlemen going forward?
I think it's better that we focus on ideas and than personalities. But President Trump is such a huge personality; it's almost inevitable that it became about him. But it also has a flip side. It has a positive side. A lot of people see in him somebody who speaks the truth, is genuine. You have all these politicians all over the world. In whatever country people are watching this, they know most politicians are slick. They are telling you what you think they think that you want to hear, and that's how politics has been done forever. And here comes this person who, for better or worse, is genuine and tells you what he believes. And there's something, I don't know if endearing is the right word, but something refreshing, if nothing else, about that, and it appeals to a lot of people. And when you pair that with regular working class people who feel that they have not had somebody represent them and speak for them, and they've been spoken down to for decades, they see in him a champion, somebody who's maybe imperfect, but he's up there fighting, and he's fighting for them, and above all, he's fighting for America, and he is putting Americans first. And I think that's another thing that people are usually bashful about, putting their own country first when they shouldn't be. I certainly hope that every leader in every country thinks that their country is the greatest country in the world, and that they put their interests first.
You said that he's being genuine and putting America first, but many would argue that while he knew about this pandemic since the beginning of the year, he did not, disclose that to the American public at a very critical time. More than 230,000 people have died. How would you say that he is putting America's interests first by letting his own people down?
Well, he has not let American people down. He's done an excellent job on the COVID response. It is so disingenuous of people to come after the fact, and Joe Biden was nowhere to be found, and we're dealing with something that's never been dealt with before ever, not in 100 years. Something that was brand new. He stopped travel coming in, and
I think Joe
everybody knew that
Biden was distancing himself safely from the virus, as he should have done, as President Trump should have done all this time. But he was out at rallies spreading the virus. I mean, how would you defend that?
I don't think so. People can walk and chew gum at the same time, and so we can use common sense. And we're free Americans. Ultimately, people have to be able to make their own choices. And the survival rate is incredible. Now we didn't know it at the time, so it's okay to be a little more cautious at the beginning. But the survival rate is very, very high, and we are ultimately still free Americans. And that spirit of being free and not being told to be locked down, at some point there's a risk to life, and so
you see where you stand on
we can walk and chew gum at the
Trump's
same
personality. But well, from an international perspective, from international observers looking at this election, now, Dr. Nielsen Wright, how do you think the last 4 years of Trump's presidency, including how he conducted himself during this election, before it as well, has impacted the international community's view of America as what we traditionally saw as a beacon of modern-day democracy?
Well, there's no doubt that as your previous speaker was mentioning, Donald Trump is certainly a personality. He is different from previous presidents. It bears repeating that this is a man who has torn up all of the conventions of American foreign policy and diplomacy and domestic politics. I would take issue with the idea that he has handled the COVID-19 epidemic in anything approaching a normal way. I mean, with 100,000 cases now being reported daily, it's extraordinary the level of infection that exists in the United States. It's remarkable that this hasn't dented the enthusiasm of some of his diehard supporters. But I think history will judge this president extremely harshly, as it should do, for failing to deal with the pandemic in a way that would have saved lives. And this is a real tragedy. But beyond that, in terms of American policy abroad, in terms of America's traditional allies, who I think have lost faith in this president, if they ever had it to begin with, I think it's been extraordinarily damaging. The fact that President Trump came out on the night of the election and alleged with not a scintilla of evidence that there was fraud and called for a cessation of counting of votes, it's a direct challenge to the very basis of the democratic system in the United States. And this is going to be extraordinarily damaging, both in terms of America's reputation globally, but also in terms of what may happen when the election result is finally announced, as we expect could take place in the next day or two, when some of those critical remaining states finally report their vote tallies. How do you bring the country together? How do you create a sense that this has been a legitimate election? And in all of this, I have to say, it's incumbent on Republican politicians, whether in House or Senate seats, whether in local politics, to come out and underscore the importance of respecting the integrity of the democratic process. Because the man at the very top of the ticket, the President of the United States, is clearly not respecting that process. It's one thing to cite the importance of contesting close elections, but there is a profound irony in citing the kind of inefficiencies of the electoral system when it was Republicans themselves who argued that postal ballots could not be counted ahead of November 3rd. And that's why we're seeing, for example, in states like Pennsylvania, a delay in the counting process, not because of the failure of the electoral system, but because some Republicans have been seeking to exploit the process to try and discredit those legitimate votes and try and undermine the very legitimate democratic process that is unfolding right now.
Would you have anything to say to that, Mr. Kravaric?
Well, I disagree. We have a mishmash of an electoral system or a balloting system here in the United States. It's up to the various states. I wish it was more centralized. I think that's something for the next Congress to take up and have some kind of a guardrail and some systems that go, across state lines, at least for presidential elections. But I think when you look at the voter suppression that's been going on against President Trump, the entire establishment with the polling and social media, I mean, they are really all against this president. And what are they so afraid of? Here's somebody that's finally, for the first time, looks out for regular people and puts America first. And there's nothing to be bashful about. And when we have, I was born and raised in Europe, and we have people in Europe trying to dictate to people in America, oh, you ought to be this way or that way. United States is going to look out for itself first, just like every other country should look out for itself first. And then the United States has been taken advantage of for far too long, and countries not pulling their own weight. And there's a new sheriff in town, and of course it upsets a lot of the other partners, if you will, but we're going to keep our partners close, and President Trump has done a great job on foreign policy. I know people don't like to hear that, but for the first time we have peace, Israel making peace with a lot of Middle Eastern neighbors. And so there's something to be said for being a strong leader, and President Trump is a strong leader, and I disagree we're going to have him for another 4 years.
Has he really stood up for the working class, though? Have their lives really improved? During the pandemic, we're seeing so many layoffs. People don't have access to sufficient income. They don't have access to services. Trump wants to take away your healthcare system and deprive working class people of decent healthcare services.
We had an amazing economy where the people on the lower end of the economic spectrum were doing tremendously well. We need to get back to that. We're not looking to keep America shut down. We can walk and chew gum at the same time. I was born and raised in Sweden. Sweden, as a matter of fact, has done a great job of balancing both safety and openness. And look at, in Europe, we're talking about the cases. We have cases, but let's talk about death rates and hospitalizations. Those are down, and so we have a case-demic, not a pandemic. And we want to, we have to use normal common sense precautions. But Americans are better off, and we want to open things up. And Democrats want to keep things shut down. In California, our governor wants to shut us down more and more, and now coming out with all kinds of crazy edicts that are only coming from the left. We're supposed to have Thanksgiving dinner with our mouth guards on.
But the numbers are undeniable. Bites. You had more than 230,000 deaths, and the US has one of the highest death rates in the world from COVID-19. I mean, the numbers speak for themselves, really. And, well, Dr. Nielsen-Wright, what about foreign policy? Is the US really doing that well on foreign policy?
Well, I mean, it depends what metric you're going to use, right? I mean, if you take, for example, America's historic alliances with countries such as Britain, South Korea, the United States, I think it's fair to say that many national leaders in Europe and in Asia have been horrified at the willingness of Donald Trump to abandon the best part of half a century or more of convention when it comes to managing those alliance relationships. We see a much more transactional American president, yes, promoting the national interest, but often at the expense of many of those allies. You look at, for example, the bitter debates over host nation support, with acute pressure coming from Donald Trump on South Korea, on Japan, to massively increase their defense expenditure, tearing up some of the very important agreements that have been the basis of international cooperation, pulling out of the Paris Global Environment Accord, undermining international institutions, challenging the legitimacy of organizations like NATO, cozying up to authoritarian leaders such as Putin and Xi Jinping, abandoning America's commitment to the protection of human rights. There are a whole range of different areas where Donald Trump has really departed from what used to be a fairly bipartisan consensus about the importance of America acting as a global guarantor, acting as a benign hegemon, supporting international order. And that's why we're seeing the fragmentation of some of those alliance relationships. There will, I think, if Joe Biden, as increasingly looks likely, wins the presidency, be a sigh of relief on the part of many of those allies, whether in Tokyo or in Seoul. To a lesser extent, I would say, in the United Kingdom, where the Prime Minister there, Boris Johnson, of course, himself something of a populist leader in the same mold as Donald Trump, has been looking to the United States to provide an avenue away from the chaos that has ensued post-Brexit. President Biden, I think, will be less tolerant of the similarly kind of dismissive approach to truth and accuracy. Donald Trump is a habitual liar and has demonstrated a profound disregard for evidence, facts, the truth. he may appeal to some working class Americans because of his carefully cultivated image of being a man of the people. But this is an elitist, a wealthy businessman who has a history of scam business accords. I mean, extremely adept in trying to present a different image, and that's clearly been demonstrated, the success of that and some of the support in this election. But the idea that this is a man who actually represents truth and objectivity, I'm sorry to say, preposterous.
Well,
I'm afraid we'll have to wrap up the discussion here.
That's ridiculous. We're going to look at President Trump for 4 more years.
We're going to have to call it today now, but thank you both so much for your wonderful insights. I mean, the results still aren't out yet, and it remains unclear, but what is clear is that there is this divide in America over what is, putting America first, and it's really all about finding that middle ground, and hopefully we will see that. But thank you, gentlemen, so much for your insights. That was Mr. Tony Kravaric, the Republican chair in California of San Diego. Thank you very much for your time. And that was Dr. John Nielsen Wright at the University of Cambridge, joining us both today from San Diego and Paris.
Yeah.
This is also where we end the week with our final episode today on Arirang Global Insight. We'll be back on Monday, Korea time. Don't miss it. Have a wonderful weekend wherever you are. Goodbye.